All right, folks, we are now going to talk a little bit about deviance. Now, so deviance and crime are presented in the same chapter, but deviance is quite different than crime, okay? Now, you could be deviant and not be criminal. And if you're criminal, you're likely deviant, okay? Excuse me, that was deviant. So let's jump in here and let's start this. So the first thing here is going to give you an idea. This is a great picture in your book. Look at this guy here. If you look in the book, you can see a little bit better. It's towards the beginning of the chapter. Let me tell you what page it's on. On page 211, right? So if you look at that picture, so you got a guy here. Now, by the way, I love deviance, right? A lot of you, as we're covering this material, a lot of people that go into sociology have an interest going into criminal justice work. As a matter of fact, if you go into law enforcement, you're required to take sociology classes, right? It's sociologists the ones that study crime, okay? But deviance is, can be everybody, and it is everybody. I mean, deviance is at play in every moment of our lives. Maybe not every moment, but certainly every day. It plays an important role. So, but what I like about this picture is that you get this guy with dreadlocks, really long dreadlocks, wearing a tie-dye shirt. He's got a smile on his face. Looks like he might be high, right? And look at the girls behind him. Look, with a look of disgust. Man, when I just did that face, I look ugly on camera. That's what's fun about Snapchat, right? Doing stuff that you're not supposed to do, the filters and the looks that you have, and deviance can be fun. Deviance isn't always bad, okay? But check this out, right? The definition here says, how a society defines deviance, who is branded as deviance, and what people decide to do about deviance all have to do with the way society is organized. So, that's something that I talked about in the lecture on crime is, we've been talking about social organization. Well, because we know how society is organized, we also know when society is not organized. It's an interesting question. Does the organization of society come before the disorganization of society? Well, in the modern world that we live in, most of us are born into an organized society. And that's what we're taught, how to fit into that. So as a result, we know what it means to not fit in. And there's a risk when we do things to not fit in. Sometimes the risk is worth the reward. Sometimes it's not. We're going to get to that, okay? But again, it is the stuff of culture, right? And values, attitudes, beliefs, norms, formal policy, and law. And again, crime is a violation of formal policy and law, and deviance is a violation of norms. So this is something totally different. Again, you could be deviant and not be criminal, right? You could be deviant and not be criminal. A lot of interesting stuff in the study of deviance, okay? So again, as we talk about social structure, society, groups mediating our understanding of society, let's keep in mind that this stuff plays out within social institutions, right? So these policies, norms, values, beliefs are within social institutions. So culture, as we know it, plays out in lots of different ways. So in one group that we run with, we may have this way of doing things, this type of culture. In another social setting, it may be a different set of rules and policies and norms. And let's not underestimate the importance of norms in society, okay? I mean, I think an argument can be made that norms, values, and beliefs are more important than law. It's the norms, the values, and beliefs that we experience with people every day that serve to kind of keep us connected and in check with one another, right? So norms guide almost all human activities, all right? Some categories of people are defined as deviant regardless of what they do. We've had a tendency to look at people of color as being deviants because they're people of color. When I say we, white people in white society. Now that may strike you as kind of odd for me to make that statement, but the evidence is pretty clear on that. When you look at racism, when you look at prejudice and discrimination, that's rooted in categories of difference. And, society, over the course of U.S. history, has seen non-white populations as different. Deviant just because they're different than the white society. And that's also a big reason as to why this country has difficulty getting through its racist history, of coming to terms with that. Now, we'll talk a little bit about that after break, when we get to the chapters on race, ethnicity, and politics and that sort of stuff. Okay? All right, so moving on to the next slide here. Now check this out, right? So how is society organized? So we talk about social structure, but I just made a statement that, norms and values and beliefs are kind of the glue that hold things together. So we think of this as social control. Now, formal social control, that's law, right? I mean, you could speed down the street if you want, but you also understand that you open yourself up for formal punishment by the law enforcement. This idea that we live in a free society, well, freedom is constructed. You're free according to what the law says. You can't do whatever you want to do. We are a country of laws. We are a society of laws. So freedom is defined by the law. Well, what is it that keeps us going again from day to day? The law is obviously there, but in the small interactions that we have with one another, that's the informal social control. Again, guidelines, expectations that you get from your friends, from your family, from maybe your boss, maybe your parents, people that are in positions of authority, okay? And so I think you're going to find it interesting as we look at some of the different theories and perspectives of deviance. And there's a couple in particular that I want to talk about that I hope you find a little bit of interest in it, the way that I do, okay? Deviance varies according to cultural norms. So, what we define as deviant can change over time. What was deviant maybe 50 years ago might be normal now. Back in the 60s, smoking marijuana was not only deviant, but criminal. Well, in our country now, there are states that allow you to smoke pot. So how do you reconcile something that's legal versus another state where it's illegal? And what does it mean of how we think about people that smoke pot? They're not hippies and deadheads anymore. Maybe there's a different way of thinking about. So norms change. And what we see as being morally right and wrong, that changes too. Values and beliefs, moral judgment, that can change as culture changes, okay? Moving on to the next slide here. So again, tying this back into, the importance of institutions, of the groups that we're involved in, and the norms and the parameters by which we interact with one another in those contexts, right? One thing about this that we've not talked a lot about, as you're looking at this diagram here, right? How do the social institutions work together? So think about, the arrows this way. Right now it's just talking about individuals connected to groups to education. Well, how does education and the government work together? So how do the norms, values, policies, start to intersect across institutions? And that reinforces expectations of behavior. You don't have a whole lot of variation of policies within education compared to policies in the workplace or policies in religion, unless you're part of a cult, right? So, this diagram is social organization. When people are engaged in behaviors that are outside the norms, then they're deviant. If they're engaging in behaviors within the institution of the workplace that are against the law, then now they're not only deviant, but they could potentially be criminal if society recognizes them as violating the law of society and punishes them as a result of their illegal behavior. So it's interesting. On one hand, this diagram gives us social organization, but it also gives us a blueprint of understanding when people are deviant or understanding when people may be engaging in criminal behavior. Okay? So again, let's not underestimate, norms, values, and beliefs within social experience, within a social institution, and how that affects how we interact with one another. We want to be accepted. Most people do. And if we go along with the rules and the norms, then we're going to fit in just nicely. Well, that's boring sometimes, isn't it? We're going to get to that in just a second. Okay. All right, so social foundations of deviance. So both norms and the way people define rule breaking involve social power. Well, who makes the rules? Deviant people or people that are in lockstep with the expectations in society? Rule makers, rule breakers, and rule enforcers, right? It's an interesting dynamic to think about. Think of, lawmakers are the ones that pass laws. Well, what's their background? What do you think the patterns are in race? What do you think the patterns are in social class? We're going to look at that a little bit more when we get to the chapter on government. Are poor people the ones that write the laws? Are the laws that are written, do they target poor people? Do they target people of color? Do they target people of a certain background? So think about that. Okay, social foundations of deviance. So there's a lot of theories on why people engage in deviant behavior, why people become criminal. A lot of theories on that. And so the three major theories in sociology, remember, structural functionalism, social conflict theory, and then symbolic interactionism. So the structural functional theories around deviance have a lot to do with structure. Well, how does society teach, how to go along with the norm or understanding the norm? And this gets now into Emile Durkheim's insight into deviance. One of the most influential early thinkers on how we think about deviance in society. And, he says these things right here, these kinds of things. Okay. Deviance encourages social change. Deviant people push society's moral boundaries. That's an interesting thing to think about, right? What causes society to change, doing things different? Well, how open are we to doing things different? When we start thinking about doing things different, then that means we have to change. Well, how open are we to change? To doing something different than the way we're doing it right now? How hard was it to adjust to going to school through a video camera? We're not used to doing that. And some people never adjusted. It's hard to adjust. We are creatures of habit. And when we get used to doing things, it's how we do. And it's hard to change. Now that could be a positive and a negative. And we're going to look at that in just a few minutes, okay? Durkheim claimed that deviance is a necessary element of social organization, serving several important functions. So how does deviance promote good things? Well, laws are not all laws are good. So deviance can be a very productive thing for society. Deviant behavior can be very productive for individuals, going against the norm. if the norm is a bad thing. So for example, in high school, I can remember back when I was in high school many, many years ago, it was the norm to drink underage. The norm, which is illegal to drink if you're under 21. But when I was in high school, it was quite common on a weekend for people to go to parties where there's drinking involved, and which also led to drinking and driving. That was very accepted, so much so that law enforcement didn't really punish people that much. They just pulled out their liquor and told them to go home. I can remember being several parties where the party was busted, but people didn't get arrested. Maybe we should have got arrested or something, to really instill a fear in us to not be drinking underage. So going against the norm of not drinking in high school, you run a risk of doing that. You lose friends if you didn't drink with one another. But sometimes the behavior we engage in are not good for us. So sometimes it's good to break away from the norm, especially when the norm might be mentally or physically damaging. Okay? So it's very easy for us to be caught in a relationship with someone that's not good for us, right? Or it's very easy for us to become friends with a group of people where the behavior of that group is against the norm and might even be illegal. Well, sometimes you need to break out of the habits. You need to break away from the norm of a group in order to chart a better path for yourself. That's a theory called differential association, and we'll get to that in just a second, okay? I'm going to go through deviant subcultures. So notice this is labeling theory, and it's got to do with symbolic interaction, okay? That micro level theory that says society is the product of the everyday interactions that we have with one another. So this is particularly relevant as we think about young people. If young people get labeled as deviant or as a problem child at an early age, that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If young people are constantly told by teachers, principals, administrators, parents, baseball coaches, football, dance, or whatever, you're a problem child. That label, people have a tendency to adapt to that label. And this is just one of the theories in symbolic interactionism about why people commit deviance. The word conformity is mentioned here. Okay, we're going to talk about conformity here in just a second. All right, so the medicalization of deviance, right? So our society, and some of you can relate to this, you may be received a diagnosis of being different than other people. For example, how do we treat people that have ADHD? Are they not normal? That's an interesting thing to think about. The medicalization of deviance transforms moral and legal deviance into a medical condition. How has the pharmaceutical industry developed mechanisms? How have psychologists, frankly, developed categories of difference and pushed that as a way to medicalize people for their behavior? Is ADHD wrong? Can those people not fit into society in a nice cookie cutter fashion? And so do we give these people drugs to make them fit in? So how is society structured, and how do people fit into that structure? Society has a bad way, in my opinion, of dehumanizing people. If you're not a certain way, if you don't look a certain way, if you don't act a certain way, then you don't belong. So, in our country, in the United States, we have a tendency to value diversity, but to what extent? As long as you fit in. You can be diverse, but you got to fit in. So this goes into, the workplace and educational and classes. People that don't perform normally or the way that we've historically think that people should perform, then we label them as being deviant, medicalized deviance. It's a very interesting way of thinking about deviance and diagnosing medical conditions. I mentioned differential association just a moment ago. This is the theory that looks at group dynamics, okay? So it says, this is Edwin Sutherland, by the way, it says that deviant behavior is learned. And you engage in deviant behavior because you're experiencing your practice of doing deviant behavior. So if you're in a group, the classic example of this is gangs. Gangs have a function, whether, right or wrong, right? Sometimes you'll hear about people that are a member of a gang have really close relationships with one another. Well, think about it. A gang is not very well accepted in society. So if you know that you're not accepted by other members of society, but your homies accept you, that can serve as a really strong bond between members of a gang. It's difficult for people to get out of gangs because society doesn't like them and doesn't want them. And the only people that want them are the people that are a member of the gang. That could become a really strong knit community of people, a strong group of people, right? And conformity in this case, notice it says here, conformity reaps rewards while the lack of it reaps punishment. So, the gang can kind of turn on you too. You have to conform to what the gang says to do, and if you don't, you may get beat down, right? They're not just going to kick you out of the gang, they're going to punish you in return. So what helps me to remember this theory about why people commit deviance or engage in criminal behavior is the term itself, differential association. People associate with norms, with interaction, with values and beliefs that are different than the dominant society. And that association with different ways of interacting than what the society says is okay, that constant repetitive experience serves to build an identity of deviance, right? Going back to thinking about socialization and how do we learn to be who we are? Well, if we're engaging in behaviors that are this way, that are different than what society says is okay, then that can serve to instill in us deviant or maybe even criminal behavior. Deviance is learned. Conformity is learned. You also think about risk and reward. If I get a lot of reward out of engaging in deviant behavior, and if the risk is low, then why would I do something different? How do we reward people for their behavior? Well, in society, we reward people for the work that they do by giving them a paycheck. Well, if I could cook a drug and get paid a lot more money and the risk is really, really low of getting caught or getting busted, if I have no other options outside of that, then that's something I may engage in, okay? Let me take you to the next theory here. This is one that I identify with quite a bit, okay? So control theory, Travis Hershey. So Hershey says that there are 4 key elements of control theory. Attachment. So what he's getting at here is, how does your engagement in society keep you under control, keep your potential of being wild? How does it tame you? How does it domesticate you, if you will, right? So attachment, strong social attachments. So if I'm attached to the right things in society, if I believe in those attachments, if I get opportunity through those attachments, if it's affirming, if I get rewards, if it makes me feel good, then I'm likely to stay a part of that, right? So let me give you an example of myself. I run a lot of risk of engaging in illegal behavior. I'm married, I've got children, I've got a job, I make money, people perceive me a certain way. I run the risk of engaging in criminal behavior. Now, if you're 15 to 24, remember that street profile of a criminal, street criminal? What is my attachment if I'm a teenager? Do I believe in what I'm doing? Do I like going to school? Do people like me in school? Do I feel valued? Do I feel like people think that I'm smart? Now, again, if you think about socialization, we're talking about the lifelong process of developing your human potential and learned culture. So if you're learning deviant behavior in lots of different ways, it's going to be kind of hard to unravel that. Well, this is why it's important for people to feel engaged in their groups, in groups that are, seen as socially relevant in society. So connection to schools, maybe connection to sport teams, connections to academics, connections to religion. Religion, excuse me, has shown to be a strong indicator of morality. If you're strongly connected to a religion, particularly the mainstream religions, then you're less likely to engage in deviant or immoral behavior. So let me show you this slide here again, right? Excuse me. So as an individual, if I feel attachment in my family, involvement, if I do a lot of things with my family, then I'm less likely to do something that would turn my family against me, right? If I'm attached to school, if I enjoy what I'm studying, if I'm doing my schoolwork and getting proper recognition for my schoolwork, and I like the school, then I'm less likely to engage in things that would turn my teachers against me, that would make me feel like I don't belong in school, right? And so you can think about this all across here. So I'm going to go back now to looking at the Hershey theory. And again, look at what it's talking about. Opportunity, greater access to legitimate opportunity. There's a theory out there called illegitimate opportunity structures. Illegitimate. So when we think about something that is legitimate, we think it being socially acceptable. So for example, how do I get my money? Do I have a job that's socially acceptable? Or do I make money by selling drugs? That's an illegitimate opportunity structure, the drug subculture, right? So opportunity through legitimate structures, okay? There's a lot more social acceptance of that than there is those that are illegitimate. Extensive involvement in legitimate activity inhibits deviance. So again, if I'm involved in things that society says is okay, then I'm less likely to engage in deviance because I would risk my involvement in those activities. Strong belief in conventional morality and respect for authority controls deviance, okay? All right, so we're gonna stop right there. That's deviance, really interesting topic. And again, this is just introduction to deviance. There's a whole subset field of sociology that's about the study of deviance, okay? So hang in there, see you soon, and let me know if you have any questions.